yesterday's news.
Hello and welcome to Old News, the programme and podcast which looks at news stories of the day through the papers of yesterday. Wind power this week. Not far from the news for any length of time these days in the Isle of Man, be it the papers or the radio or the TV or whatever else, with the suggestion we could have wind turbines, sizable wind turbines, down in the south of the island. And quite recently, just the latest story saying that some eco-surveys, they're going to look at the ecological impact. And again, there are those who are for and those who are against. What it is not, of course, is a new idea, generating power from the wind. It's gone on for years, generations on the Isle of Man when it comes to perhaps farming machinery or wind mills, of course. I will take you way back to perhaps the Manx Sun of Saturday, June the 3rd, 1871, by Mr. Brideson, valuable estate, excellent meadow, etc., to be sold by auction by Mr. Brideson on Wednesday the 7th of June, adjourned from the 17th of May, that capital estate forming part of the quarterland of Ardennen, in the parish of Andreas, comprising about 31 acres of very superior arable land in a high state of cultivation, with genteel residence, accommodations, out of offices and threshing mill, worked by wind power. Just the job. Didn't need any power for that, but of course that's what they had to rely on. Horsepower, manpower, wind power, or maybe water power, of course, with the water mills going on. It will look more interestingly, perhaps going back a little bit, to 1837 in the Mona's Herald, Tuesday, November the 28th. An interesting piece about locomotion by wind. Mr. A. Patrick of Georgetown, Demerara, it starts, has invented an ingenious locomotive engine which, says the editor of Guiana Chronicle, we have seen. The propelling power is wind, and curious to say, it goes even faster against the wind when it is, in what in other cases it would be called, in its favour. Let the wind blow from whatever quarter it may, it adapts itself to every chop of the wind, or self-trims its sails to every breeze, being equally applicable to ordinary railways, if not roads, and vessels on the sea. Sail-powered trains. That would have been interesting going between Port Erin and Douglas, wouldn't it, or up to Ramsey. However, when it comes to electricity generation by wind power, we need to skip forward another 50 years or so. But to 1958 was one of the big years when this was examined first, so hardly new news. We look at the Mona's Herald of Tuesday, March the 11th, 1958. The Isle of Man Electricity Board are to carry out experiments for the wind generation of power. This follows tests over the past few years regarding wind velocities in various parts of the island. The board's engineer, Mr. L. Douglas, is satisfied there would be a definite output from the windmill type of generator now in use commercially in Denmark. The Ministry of Fuel and Power have offered the board the use of an experimental wind generator of 25 kilowatts capacity, and the board are to decide within the next 4 weeks whether they will avail themselves of this offer, as the cost of transport is high. No changes there then. In any event, the generator would not be brought into use until late summer. The board are anxious to find out whether this type of generation is an economical proposition in the Isle of Man. We're still debating that question. Later that same year, in the Ramsey Chronicle, Friday, October the 10th, 1958, power from the air? ? Tests near Michael. Tests with a view to obtaining power from the air are to be carried out in the Kirkmichael area by Isle of Man Electricity Board engineers, forerunner of the MUA, of course. We are informed that the apparatus that will be used is the property of the Research Association of Britain, and this is one of the selected places for testing it. We are informed that the theory of generating current by wind power is by no means new, but we are a long way from the stage when we can expect cheap current from this source. Nevertheless, the experiment is interesting, and it indicates that our island electricity engineers are always alive to the possibilities of any new ideas for cheapening the cost to the consumer, even though some may never achieve that result. Later that same month, in the Mona's Herald, October the 14th, 1958, experiment with wind generation of power to begin at Michael. The same site, the test of the Isle of Man Electricity Board had begun preliminary work for the installation of plant at Michael for the wind generation of electric power. This follows a series of tests regarding wind velocities in various parts of the island over the past few years. The board are satisfied there would be a definite output from this type of generation and are anxious to discover whether the windmill generators now in commercial use are economic in the Isle of Man. Still pondering that question. In November of 1958 in the Mona's Herald, wind power scheme starts. Generator is now in commission, we are told. The Isle of Man Electricity Board's experimental wind generator is now in commission on Cronk-na-Fedjig, near Little London. I don't know whether that's the name of a field, obviously a hill perhaps. Exactly where it is? Well, around Little London it seems. Members of the board are visiting the site today. Mr. L. Douglas, the engineer and secretary, told Mona's Herald that the board, as a member of the Electrical Research Association, has been actively contributing to wind power investigations for some years, and its work in maintaining wind recording stations and compiling records has been recognised in the selection of a site in the island for continued experimental work. The wind generator unit, now erected on Cronk-na-Fedjig, is the property of the Ministry of Fuel and Power, who, with the ERA, developed and tested it extensively at Cranfield in Bedfordshire. The point was reached when a site with more sustained wind velocities was needed and in the area of a supply authority ready to absorb the output of the unit. The unit has therefore been offered to the board for an extended testing period and in spite of its small size, 25 kilowatts, should contribute some 90,000 to 100,000 units per annum to the board's system. The present site is attractive because of the 825-foot elevation, the open sweep to the prevailing wind and the contour of the hill itself. Sharp escarpments or cliffs are detrimental. The Ministry, together with the ERA, are already designing a larger unit with an output of 100 kilowatts, but the board looks forward to machines of 400 kilowatts and in groups of 4 or 6 on nearby sites. Sounds vaguely familiar, although still slightly smaller, I think. Wind generation in this scale will, of course, be a handsome contribution to the island's requirements. That back in 1958. And finally, in the Ramsey Courier of November the 28th of that year, Electricity Board's generator erected. The wind generator erected at Cronk-na-Fedjig by the Electricity Board as a member of the Electrical Research Association is capable of contributing 90,000 to 100,000 units a year to the board's system. But a larger type of unit is being designed, we are told. Hasn't taken that long then. I think we're looking at a larger kind of unit now for the Isle of Man in 2025 rather than 1960. As I say, it's all old news. Until next week, cheerio. You're gonna be yesterday's news.